In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Weekly Roundup. I am Fahim Abbas. As you know that, we'll be discussing important political, social and domestic affairs in the light of sermon of Ustad Muhtaram Sayyid Jawad Naqvi. As you know that, 3rd June 2021 had marked the 32nd death anniversary of leader of Islamic Revolution Imam Khomeini. Imam Khomeini, who had unprecedented faith in Islam and ideology of Islam. Imam Khomeini, who stood against the cruel regime of Shah. People stood behind him, and ultimately the Islamic Revolution was successful on February 11, 1979. Imam Khomeini, who had showed nations the path of freedom. Imam Khomeini, who had showed nations how to stood against the cruel global regimes who had continuously been oppressing Muslim world throughout the history. Imam Khomeini, about whom Allama Iqbal predicted in early 1930s that he is seeing a person who is coming in Iran, who will ultimately lead the nation of Iran to freedom. So, we'll be discussing in this program about Islamic Revolution and what is the ideology of Imam Khomeini and Islamic Revolution, and how this Islamic Revolution was successful. And then ultimately we will be discussing about certain factors why this revolution was curved to Islamic Revolution of Iran and it was not spread throughout the world. And then ultimately we will be discussing the path which Imam Khomeini had showed to different nations of the world. As always, I am pleased to have been accompanied by Mr. Ali. How are you, Mr. Ali?
Not too bad, thank you. Yourself?
I am very fine. So how was your last week, Mr. Ali?
Yeah, it was good actually. We had the family come over from Karachi and we spent some quality time with them. So it was really good.
So as I have mentioned that this 3rd June had marked the 32nd death anniversary of great leader of Islamic Revolution Imam Khomeini, and linking it with Pakistan, the great philosopher and poet of Pakistan Allama Iqbal had predicted this in 1930s that he is seeing a person who is coming in Iran and he will ultimately lead the Iranian nation to this victory, and this happened. So this was the wish of Allama Iqbal, which just came true in the region of Gulf and in Iran.
Yeah, true. Actually, Imam Khomeini was the symbol of freedom. He is considered an icon of anti-imperialism, and he was Allama Iqbal actually dreamt about the subcontinent, that people of subcontinent will get this independence from this long-term slavery. But initially, as we see Allama Iqbal, that his poetry was in Urdu, but later on he changed the language to Persian. So because he could see the potential in the people of Ajam, in Jawanan Ajam as he calls them, and he, as you mentioned, that he predicted that a man is coming who will be able to break the shackles of slavery, and we saw that person came, but unfortunately we are still in the subcontinent, we are still living the life of slavery, and we didn't catch up the message from that great person.
Yes, it was very surprised when the Islamic Revolution was successful in 1979. It was surprised not only for the Western Bloc led by the United States of America, it was surprise for the regional powers, and it was also a surprise for the people of Iran. Some people of Iran who were thinking that a clergy cannot bring this revolution and he cannot force the Shah to leave this country, because we know that Shah was very powerful and he was acting as a policeman of the region for the Americans, because with the help of Shah, just Americans were keeping an eye in the region, and ultimately this revolution was successful and the dream of Allama Iqbal was true. But as we know that during the era when Allama Iqbal was predicting about the arrival of Imam Khomeini in his own country and in his own region, at that time called as subcontinent, it was a colonized region and the Muslims of subcontinent was also suffering, and Allama Iqbal was continuously telling them the path how they can get the freedom from the slavery, and this was best adopted. The ideology of Allama Iqbal was best adopted and understood by the people of Iran, and on the basis of his ideology and combined efforts of Imam Khomeini, the revolution was successful.
That is actually true, because we know that Imam Khomeini, the dream of Imam Khomeini was seen by Allama Iqbal, and his initial message was for the people of subcontinent. But we see the people in Iran, they rightly claim that actually the body of Allama Iqbal is, although buried in Pakistan, they call Allama Iqbal Iqbal-e-Lahori, and they say that the actual soul of Allama Iqbal lives in Iran, and because they listened to the message of Allama Iqbal, and they followed their great leader of revolution, and they were able to topple the Pahlavi monarchy, which was present for thousands of years, and it is a great success which friends and enemies both couldn't predict. Both had doubts about it, and they thought that actually the arrogant powers, the big powers, as well as the Pahlavi regime, they were quite confident that these so-called ulamas or mullahs or maulavis, they can't do such a big job. But we see that revolution was successful. It actually started from 1963 after Imam Khomeini gave a speech against Shah regime when they passed a law which was giving immunity to United States over Iranian oil. And soon after that, they arrested Imam Khomeini, and we see only in a few years' time, in 1979 actually, that inqilab or revolution came. On 1st of February, Imam arrived in Iran, and before his arrival, Shah had fled the country, and on 11th of February, that inqilab was successful.
Yes, before that, in 1964, Imam Khomeini was exiled by Shah to Iraq, and he stayed there for 15 years. And even his son was also martyred there in Iraq. And after that, Imam Khomeini had to move on to some other countries, and ultimately he was present there in France, and from there he flew back to Iran, and Shah had to leave, and he was unsuccessful, and it was a surprise for the Shah and even the agency, the secret agency of Shah, which was known as Savak, and it was the cruel agency of its time, but it was unsuccessful in curbing the revolutionary thoughts within the Iran and revolutionary ideology. And it was basically the faith of Imam Khomeini in the Islam and ideology of Islam and on Allah, because Imam Khomeini said that if we see ourselves, then we see nothing, but if we see Allah, then it is how we can oppress the cruel, we can deal with the cruel regimes. If we only rely on ourselves, then it is difficult for us, but if we also saw Allah, then we can deal with the cruel regimes, and ultimately due to this faith of Imam Khomeini, this revolution was successful.
And Imam Khomeini was actually a divine gift, and we see his superb sort of like ability that he was able to lead that revolutionary movement while even being in exile. As you mentioned, he passed several years in Iraq, and he spent some time in Turkey, and he lived in the outskirts of Paris in France. But he was in touch with the people of Iran, and they followed him really well. And then that revolution was successful. And because Imam Khomeini was sort of a that charismatic personality, so we know that people love these charismatic personalities. In recent history, we see some other these sort of people like Sayyid Hassan Nasrullah and Sardar Qasim Soleimani, that people love them. And in the history, you'll see that people used to love Imam Ali alayhi salam and Imam Hussain alayhi salam.
Yes, one interesting fact is that Dr. Israr Ahmad, he has also said that it is only those persons who belong to the Maktab-e Ashura, they can ultimately lead the nations to freedom, and they can break the shackles of slavery. Only this maktab has the ability and the potential, Maktab Ashura and known as Maktab Imam Hussain al-Islam, which is the path of resistance and which is the path of freedom.
Yep.
He predicted that only the persons who belong to this school of thought and who are being trained by this school of thought, they can ultimately lead this world to freedom. And as we know that Imam Khomeini also belonged to this school of thought.
Yeah, and actually, our Sunni brothers, they had more awareness about Inqilab even when the movement was going on. Allama Maulana Maududi, the head of Jamaat Islami, we know the Islamic organization in Pakistan, he actually invited Imam Khomeini to, when he was living in Paris, to come over to Pakistan, and he promised that he is going to support Imam Khomeini with all his power and with his. And we know that Jamaat Islami has got a huge potential. It's a strong organization and really organized organization, and they understood that what is the importance of this great personality, because he is a universal personality. You can't confine these sort of people like Allama Iqbal and Imam Khomeini to a certain country or a certain sect, and
or within the boundaries of a state.
That's true. That's true.
But they are global personalities.
That's true.
And their ideology, as you know, that it is also global, because they were not representing their own ideology, rather they were representing Islam, and Imam Khomeini showed the practical form of Islam in Iran. And that's why, as we know, that Pakistan was the ultimate neighbor to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and had good relations, and the people of Pakistan also had good relation with the people of Iran. And as we know that the people of Pakistan have love sentiments toward every nation, and they keep on loving, and it is a very good strength of these people, and people of Pakistan started loving Imam Khomeini. And the interesting fact is that it was Sunnis who were the first to started loving Imam Khomeini, and as you have said that Jamaat Islami was the first to approach Imam Khomeini.
And they visited and met Imam Khomeini several times. And actually, as you mentioned, that Pakistanis have got this ability to love people. We know they love UK. Everyone wants to go there and settle. And but although we know that what sort of hate is present for Pakistanis and Muslims in West, but everyone loves UK, and we have been slaves of UK for a few years. And the Pakistanis love Saudi Arabia, Arabs, although we know that what they have done, how they treat Pakistanis, they think that Pakistanis are there like slaves or something. And people also, some part of Pakistanis, they love Iran too. And although some of the people didn't have good experience when they go to shrines to visit the holy shrines, but this tendency was actually Pakistanis to love other some great leaders and some other nations. It resulted in their love for Imam Khomeini, and we see it more and more in our Sunni politicians and Sunni some religious scholars. Yep.
But unfortunately, as we move on, and as we know that it was Islamic revolution, and the West was very vigilant, and they were not even it was not even in their mind that Islamic revolution can happen in this century, which they had declared the century of technology. And they were very relaxed that Islam cannot do anything of them. And it was the Islamic ideology and due to Islam that the Islamic revolution was successful, and Islam provided the people of Iran this strength to stood against the cruel regime.
Yeah.
But later on, the enemies of revolution didn't just sit back and relax. They started efforts to curbing this revolution. They just want to halt this revolution within the boundaries of Iran. And as Imam Khomeini has said that this is a global revolution and it is based on the Islamic ideology, and as we know that Islam is for all the human beings, as we know that our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is also Rahmatul lil Alameen, and his ideology is global, universal. Yeah. So this was also the ideology of Islam and Imam Khomeini, and he wanted to spread this revolution throughout the Muslim world in particular and throughout the other parts of the world, world. But unfortunately, the enemies of revolution also played their part, and they launched two mechanisms to curb this revolution. One was their propaganda machinery, and second was sectarianism. As we know that propaganda has been very successful throughout the history. If we go back even to the days of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and
Yeah, and you
during
truly
the days of Imam Ali alayhi
yeah,
salam.
yeah, and you truly said that actually they that sort of love from the people of Pakistan and the people in the Muslims in many parts of the world frightened for Imam Khomeini, frightened the rulers in these countries, and they were afraid that this sort of ideology shouldn't spread to these to the other countries. So we have seen in past that the negative propaganda changes the perceptions of people, and as it happened with Imam Ali alayhi salam, that he was a charismatic personality and people used to love him.
And the
But,
people of
yeah,
that time accused Imam Ali alayhi salam that he was involved in the martyrdom of
Yeah.
third caliph. And when Imam Ali alayhi salam formed the government, his whole efforts were just limited to curb those people who stood against him, and he had to fight fought 3 wars, and he had to explain that he was not involved in that
Yeah.
murder. But even still, because the propaganda of Umayyads were so successful, and they just brainwashed the people of that time,
Yeah.
so they just considered Imam Ali alayhi salam that he was involved.
Yeah.
However, the interesting fact was that Imam Ali alayhi salam was the person who actually defended third caliph.
That's true, yeah. And actually, the same things have happened in history. But as we mentioned, that the enemies of Iran, they were quite optimistic. They've tried every sort of thing to topple this Islamic regime. And I was listening to Rabbi Muazzam Sayyid Ali Khamenei, the speech he gave on 32nd anniversary of Imam Khomeini. He was referring to the some of the some of the claims by the ex-US regime, and he was referring to the ex-Secretary of State John Bolton, in which in 2017, when he was addressing ceremony, he actually predicted that Iran is not going to see the 40th anniversary of that revolution. But we see that in revolution is
The
getting
revolution has
stronger day by
seen
day. Yeah.
40th anniversary. Later on, when we, as you know, that we are talking, what were the factors which the enemies of revolution launched, and their first main thing which they did was propaganda, and they told the Muslim world that it is not Islamic revolution, rather it is Shia revolution, and they told the other parts of the world that it is Iranian revolution.
Yep.
And
referring to Professor Ghafoor,
of Jamaat
of
Islami,
Jamaat Islami, he wrote in one of the articles in that at that time that initially they thought that it's an Islamic revolution, Imam Khomeini's revolution, but then they came to the conclusion that no, it's a Shia revolution, and they were okay with it. But when they came to know that it's only an Iranian revolution, then they just sidelined from it, and they just said that we have got nothing to do with it. So that's what has resulted in distancing of our Sunni brothers.
So this propaganda
from
machinery was very successful of the Western media against the Islamic revolution. And the second factor, which was very successful, was sectarianism. As we know that during that time, Russians also invaded Afghanistan, and America was also involved in defeating Russia, and they just wanted to break the Soviet Union into pieces, and they were ultimately successful. And as a result of this part, they were also present in the region, and it was easy for the Americans and the United States to keep an eye on the Islamic revolution of Iran. And as we know that West during that time, when the revolution was successful, West just supported and backed Saddam Hussein, and he launched a war against Iran, which continued for the 8 years.
Yeah, it was the longest war in the 20th century weighed on any country. And actually, we have seen in subcontinent that before even revolution, there were huge sectarian differences between different sects of Pakistan, and people used to have munazaras and like discussions, and I mean they were sometimes crossing the red lines in just trying to prove the other sect wrong. But there was no bloodshed before 1979. It started actually after the revolution came, and in that time, as you mentioned, that during that time, when Zia was the dictator Ziaul Haq was ruling Pakistan. At that time, the USA came to this area to actually tackle inqilab as well as
also
Russia. Yes.
involved in the Afghan
Yep.
jihad,
Yep.
and different groups were ultimately
Yep.
formed,
Yep.
and sectarianism was launched,
Yep.
and
And that
tens
jihad
of
was
hundreds of
invited,
Shia were massacred
Yep.
throughout during that time, and
80s and 90s.
hatred was separate. Ultimately, hatred was separate between Shias and Sunnis, and so instead of turning their attention toward the Islamic Revolution, a domestic conflict within the Pakistan started,
Yep.
and throughout the Islamic world, this sectarianism and due to this propaganda, West was somehow able to curb this revolution within the boundaries of Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yeah, and if we talk about the Shias, what were Shia ulmas or Shias?
Yes,
the
role of Shia ulmas in Pakistan.
Yeah, it was actually, it's quite interesting that actually they were, because of the money spent by the Shah regime, and as well as their lack of awareness about Imam Khomeini, they were more attracted towards so-called Muttahid Ayatollah Sayyid Shariat Madari, who I mean, it's silly that actually they were thinking that the Islamic regime or Islamic revolution had Imam Khomeini. He's not treating him fairly, and they were complaining about it. And all the Shia Muslims, they were in Pakistan, most of them, they were supporting that anti-Imam Khomeini guy who was present in Qom.
Yes, it was expected that as we know that in Iran,
Yep.
there were mostly Shias, so the Shias of Pakistan would ultimately support that revolution.
right.
But unfortunately, these Shias were just Shia clerics were supporting Ayatollah Shayat Madari,
Yep.
and they were accusing Imam Khomeini that
Yep.
he is just repressing this Ayatollah, so-called Ayatollah. And due to this propaganda and due to this sectarianism uprising, Islamic revolution was not brought within the boundaries of Pakistan, unfortunately. So now we are going to take a short break, and after the break we will be discussing the ideology of Imam Khomeini and the path which Imam Khomeini had shown to different nations, which will ultimately lead these nations to freedom. So keep in touch with us. Welcome back after the break. As you know that in this special edition of our program Weekly Roundup, we are discussing about the Islamic Revolution of Iran. As we know that 3rd June had marked the 32nd death anniversary of Imam Khomeini. So we are discussing about Islamic Revolution and also about the ideology of Imam Khomeini. So as you know that before the break we had discussed how the ideology of Allama Iqbal and the ideology of Imam Khomeini is linked with each other, and we had also discussed certain factors which were responsible that this Islamic revolution and the ideology is now has been only limited to Iran, and other countries had not adopted this path, especially the Muslim world, although there are few countries and few organizations which have carried on this path, and but the whole nation has not carried out this path other than the Iranian nation. So after the break, as you know that we had said that we'll be discussing about the ideology of Imam Khomeini, and as you know that Mr. Ali, Imam Khomeini asked the Muslim nations to be Islam centric rather than depending on their ethnicity or relying on their nationalism. They must be Islam centric, and they must focus on the ideology of Islam and pure Islam.
Yeah, and he never said, or he never invited people from Malaysia to bring investments to Iran, or he didn't say that, he didn't tell people of Pakistan and other nations to support financially or militarily Pakistan, but he told them to be independent and to love their nation. And as you know, that his message was the message of Islam, not the message of Iran. We've been saying
Yes,
that.
as Imam Khomeini basically wanted every nation to just build their own country
Yep.
and to lead the nation toward the prosperity.
Yep.
And the path and the solution which he suggested for these
Yep.
countries was the Islamic
Yep.
ideology and the path of Rasulullah.
Yeah, and he also encouraged people and encouraged different nations to become sovereign and become self-reliant. And this sort of wish is present in every country. Every nation wants to be independent from the slavery. Even if we see the different at different occasions, our Prime Minister, before getting elected, he had said that he wants to liberate the country from the slavery of IMF and the world organizations. And he claimed that if Pakistan would have to go to beg from IMF, he would rather commit a suicide.
Yes.
But we saw that he took a U-turn and Pakistan had to do it. So because the reason is that actually the Pakistanis and us, we have got the wish to become independent, but there is no ideology behind it. So if our politicians, they are reading Machiavelli and other political theorists, then why not Imam Khomeini? Study him, study the path of revolution, how he did that and how he toppled that monarchy of thousands of years, and
the
then we
interesting
can do
fact
it,
is
we can
that
achieve it.
before Imam Khomeini, the same ideology was presented by our own philosopher,
That's true.
the great poet Allama Iqbal, and
Yep.
he just wanted us to be sovereign. He don't
Yep.
want us to be dependent on other nations, because the problem is that if we take loans from other different organizations, or
Yep.
if we depend for our certain things on
Yeah.
other
Others,
parts
then
of
we
the
can't
world,
be independent,
then we
yeah.
cannot be free in our foreign policy, and we cannot take the decisions of our own.
Yeah. And Imam Khomeini, actually, he used to love Pakistani youth, and he pointed out three things about Pakistanis: that Pakistanis are ghayur, and they are actually following the human values, and also they are great supporters of Inqilab, or they are loyal to the revolution. And that is actually, and he gave several messages to Pakistani youth, the people of Pakistan, and military, of course. Some of our military personnel, when they visited Iran and met Ayatollah Khomeini, he addressed them and gave them some messages, and did explain them the path of independence and to how to get that sovereignty and become free from
Yes.
the Western powers. Yep.
Imam Khomeini also wanted nations to be free from colonization, imperialism, even from feudalism within their own country.
That's true.
And the system of capitalism,
Yep.
which is now basically led by American bloc, and
Yep.
whatever America want to do in the world, mostly the countries are loyal to United States of America.
That's true.
But if we see in this region that our own neighbor Iran,
Yep.
they just stood against the Americans, and nothing has happened to them for 40 years. It's been a long time.
That's right.
And America
it was
has,
only because of the message
Americans
of Imam.
had left no stone unturned to
That's
just curb that revolution.
right. Yeah,
And
they've tried everything. Yeah.
the recent president of United States, he launched the campaign of maximum pressure campaign.
That didn't work.
And
Yeah.
the crippling sanctions which were imposed by other US presidents, and even during the era of Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
This whole,
Yep. Yeah, actually,
they just continuously oppose this revolution,
but this hasn't been
it
successful.
has
and,
been carried on.
Pakistan has got the potential, actually, because Pakistan is a powerful nation of more than 230 million people. We are
Yes,
at
if
atomic
we-
power, and our people are hardworking. We have got the technology, we've got agriculture. So why not we should adopt that ideology? And also, like as I mentioned, that he gave some messages to the people of Pakistan especially, and all the Muslim nations. There are certain steps which you have to follow in the path of independence. first thing which he mentioned was that actually you have to recognize the pure Islam, and you have to differentiate and stay away from iltaqati Islam and mutahajjir Islam. Iltaqati Islam is a mixture of pure and impure ideologies, and this mutahajjir sort of Islam is the type of Islam which teach you that just focus on your worshipping and just stay inside the mosque and pray, and just
the main ideology has been taken out of it.
Yeah, disconnect from the society. Whatever is happening in the society, don't worry about it. And just who is ruling you, just even if it's taghut or something, just you don't have to worry about it. That is actually the teaching of Bani Umayyah. Bani Umayyah, as we read in in different religious scholars like Imam Ghazali, a great scholar of Ahl-Sunnat, he writes at some place that actually Bani Umayyah engineered Islam after the departure of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they actually changed everything. Only azan and the namaz was left. Otherwise, everything was changed. But it's thanks to our Shia school of thought, and as well as the Imam Khomeini, who actually told people about the pure and Islam Nab, and he's actually done it. Yeah.
If we also compare Pakistan to Iran having population of just around 80 million, and
That's
we
right.
have population of 230 million, and that's a huge difference.
That's right.
And above all, we are among 7 nuclear states,
Yeah.
and Iran is not nuclear state.
That's true.
Moreover, we also have very powerful military,
Yeah.
7th largest,
That's
6th
right.
or 7th largest
That's
military,
true.
and moreover, we also have technical and skillful persons which are serving around the world. As we know that the whole of this Gulf has been developed by Pakistani workers and Pakistani laborers.
Yeah, they can do
and
it.
so we can develop our own country if we just rely on ourselves, as just Allama Iqbal wanted us to have this khudi within us, to develop this khudi, and just to focus on pure Islam. Then we can also surpass Iran.
Yeah, and the second point which he pointed out was the unity. And if you are, following the right path, but if you are not united, then you can't succeed. So he told Muslims to actually ignore the only 5% or less than 5% differences and focus on similarities. And if Muslims can become united, then because they've got resources, they've got manpower, and they've got the faith, so they can actually rule the world. So,
yes, because this was very important point on which Imam Khomeini focused, the unity of Muslim Ummah, because Muslims are in very large number and in 57 countries, and that's a lot of it. And it is the second largest religion after Christianity, as we know that. But the unfortunate fact is that Muslims are divided among them, and the major sects are Shias and Sunnis, and this is the division. And due to this division, because it is the difference of opinion, and which is a good thing, you can differ from one another, but due to this difference of opinion, a wave of sectarianism was actually launched within the Muslim by the enemies of Islam, and it was successful. And due to this sectarianism and differences within the Muslims, rather you cannot say that differences, it is because of sectarianism that the issue of Palestine and the issue of Kashmir has been there for over 7 decades.
The issue is that actually when you're trying to impose your own beliefs on others, then the problem comes. The third point which he raised was that if we want to become independent, the Muslim nations have to become free, and they have to become sovereign from the evil powers. As we know that if you're okay with Taghut, then obviously, you are going to suffer forever. But you should have the will to become independent. Yes.
Because if we go into the history of our region, subcontinent, firstly we were colonized by the British, and later on we get freedom from them, and but as we know that we were free, but we have to choose some alliances, and then we have to move toward the capitalistic bloc. And in this global scenario, these international organizations and these global powers, they just care for their own interests, and they just don't want the small states to have their own interests. So the only solutions for the Muslims is to be united and free and sovereign in their own decision making. because if you are free and sovereign, then you can have your own independent foreign policy.
That's right.
And then Muslims can support Palestine and Kashmir
and other areas as well. And the fourth point which he raised was to recognize three groups of people and stay away from them. First group which he mentioned was Mutahajir, as I explained before. The second group was the sectarian-minded people who actually want to limit the Muslims to their own sects. And the third most dangerous group of people is the people who pretend to be inqilabi, because and any revolutionary won't be misguided by an anti-revolutionary person, but the people who are actually pretending to be that revolutionary, but they are not actually revolutionary, they can misguide people, and we've seen this in Pakistan.
Yes, as the leader of revolution, Imam Khomeini has also mentioned that being a revolutionary is very tough.
That's
but
true.
Pretending to be revolutionary is rather easy.
That's true. Yeah, and fifth thing which he mentioned was that every sort of person, whoever, doesn't matter which field you belong to, you have to be present in the field. So, Huzur dar Maidan, what you say?
Huzur dar Sane.
Yeah, and so if you'll be present in the field, and if you'll be working in your special
yes,
department.
If a person and if the whole nation is responsible, and they are present in the fields of health, they are present in the field of education they are
and stuff,
fulfilling their own needs, and then it will, a very little opportunity will be left for the enemies of Islam and for the enemies of that country to just intrude into this nation.
That's right.
Because the problem in today's world is that the West and these those countries which are being considered more civilized, they just make the other nations realize that you cannot do this.
That's right.
And Imam Khomeini said to Iranian people that you can do this. Whatever you want, you can do this. And same, if we Pakistanis also realize that we can do this, as we have done this, because we are a nuclear state, and it was the most toughest thing which we had achieved, and other things we just can manufacture within our own country.
Right. That's the sixth point. Actually, he really emphasized the importance of self-reliance, and he was sometimes he was criticizing the Iranian people that why can't you people even make the box of a matchstick or cars and stuff. So if you are like we see in Pakistan, that we are depending mostly on Chinese products, and we have got all this potential to make all this. So it's a shame that although we have got all this potential and hardworking people and manpower, but still we are using products of other countries. So if we love our country, we have to speak in our own language, we have to put on own dress, and
a little bit nationalism is also important.
That is true,
because this is our homeland, and we are born here, and we have to live here.
Unfortunately, Pakistanis lack it. Here they
one interesting statement was made by the Russian President Putin. He said that Pakistan is just cemetery for Pakistanis.
Yeah, that's really embarrassing for us. And the seventh thing which we pointed out was to avoid the Western civilization. Muslims should be proud of their civilization. And when we talk about civilization and culture, we have got a great culture, Islamic culture, and we should act upon it. And so we see people that they are really impressed by the Western world. I mean, some of them, when they go and visit Western world, then they see, oh man, actually the actual sort of Islam is present there. They see the discipline there. They see some good things being done there. But actually, that is. But we see, on the contrary, we see Allama Iqbal, who is saying that there is no
Western civilization, and he stayed there, and he had observed that civilization from very close. Then he just came back and told the people that the basic and the true civilization, which can pave the way to successful for this human of this era and for the humans who are still have to be born, is Islamic civilization.
And the point here is that actually the people who claim that the Westerners, they have got the values, but in Islamic countries we don't see these values. There are two types of values. The values which are obviously there in Western world are functional values, to keep the system going.
Yes.
But the human values, I mean, Iqbal was talking about these human values that you won't see any sort of like sacrifice in West. You won't see family system. I mean, most that is causing a lot of issues, and people don't get married and they just live with each other, and this causes a lot of problems. And you know that even a mother would take rent from their own child when he's 18,
Yes, this
living
is
in
very
this world.
ridiculous on their
Yeah,
behalf.
that's right.
As this Imam Khomeini has told us that we must not turn toward the Western civilization,
yeah.
rather we should focus on our
That's right.
civilization.
True.
So concluding this, we can say that Iran is for Iranian and it is their own country. They can manage their affairs on their own, and we have nothing to do with it, with Iran. But the Islamic revolution and the personality who brought this revolution, Imam Khomeini, is a global personality, just like Allama Iqbal, who is also a global personality. And we can carry on the path of Imam Khomeini, which Imam Khomeini has shown the nations, and it would ultimately lead us to freedom. And we are also praying for the Islamic revolution to further carry on, and inshallah it will be successful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.